Welcome back to If I Knew You Better. I'm Brendan Davis, and if the ambience on this recording sounds different, that is for a great reason. I'm coming to you today with a quick programming announcement and brief solo show, and I decided to open up the doors, both for comfort as well as to share this. If I'm quiet for a second, let's see if you hear any birds or a river. Dog in the background there. I'm coming to you from a mountain cabin situated inland of Santa Cruz in a part of Northern California that is called Ben Lomond. Some of the earlier settlers in this area were apparently Scottish, and so there are a lot of Scottish names for things. But I'm having a bit of a staycation, workcation, working vacation, whatever fits. I came to the U.S. just this last Tuesday, and I have been... What? Okay, let's try this again. I'm Brendan Davis, and welcome back to a special solo episode. This is the October solo show for If I Knew You Better. And the reason you're hearing a second take on this introduction is I started trying to record this at Ben Lomond, at the mountain cabin that my friend Larry's family owns and shares with their extended family, where we were staying for a very much needed kind of working vacation as we work on our movie project that we're developing. And I'm in California for a lot of reasons. I'll talk about this in a moment. But the what's funny is now I'm recording this and I haven't edited all the pieces together, so I have to choose what I include. But I basically was recording, beautiful cabin, had the windows open, and was recording in a way that you kind of hear the waterfall and the mountain stream in the background a little bit, violating all the rules of audio. Right now I have the windows open in Palo Alto, and I'm recording in stereo, so you have some sense of place, because I really thought I wanted to make these special and do something different. But this idea was put to the test and failed miserably at Ben Lomond, because there's a house across the river that I can't even see. The tree cover is very thick. But just as I was getting started, I was getting settled into recording, and I had a nice bullet point list of what I wanted to talk about. And I get into the intro, and usually there are a few false starts with these, I'll be honest. And then, I once I click in, I kind of tend to click in. And there aren't a lot of edits. And with this show, I try not to be edited at all once I'm actually, in the piece, other than chopping up where does the music end and the intro, for the interview start, things like that. But basically, a guy at a house across the river, they use it as an event facility. And they host weddings, they host, probably quinceañeras, they host all kinds of parties. And it turned into, it was a very nice, lovely, quiet moment, and I'm starting to record, and then I just hear country concert jubilee jamboree crank up. It was so loud. And I did pro audio, I did pro sound for years, I did concert sound, and I was a rock guitar player, and this is another story. But I've been around concert production, clubs, things like this. I mean, thousands of times. This was loud. It was crazy loud. If I had been at that property, I would have been going deaf. And they absolutely blasted. So, of course, I couldn't record anything. And I probably can't even sample that here, because there might be some algorithm that, scans it and takes it down because of copyright violation, including even a few seconds of some song accidentally that I don't have the rights to, like this music, which was commissioned music from our friend Carl King. So anyway, this is a long way of saying that I probably will cut to my incredulous, what the fuck? And then we'll be cutting to this right here that you're hearing. So I want to take a few moments and address a few things and sort of talk about this show, revisit why I want to do it, because it's a work in progress. I've got a lot of information, I guess. A lot of things I've been lucky to be involved in that are coming up or going on, coming very soon. And I just really want to share this with you. But first, let me talk about nuts and bolts. So with this show, I have had really nice feedback on the episodes. I'm very proud of the interviews for the most part that I've done. And people are really opening up. We're going deep. We're getting information that is not common. Even people who have a big public narrative in some cases, like Michael Wiese or Stephen Katz, we are hearing things that then they're telling me when we stop recording, I've never really talked about this, or I haven't talked about this in this much detail with someone. And that means a lot to me. And it's the same type of approach that I sort of refined on my old show, Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, which was the really China-focused template for this show, is the forerunner for this for me. And I've got a lot of references, of course. There are aspects of, WTF with Mark Maron and Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and NPR, hopefully, and, All Things Considered and Fresh Air. There are hopefully elements of all the shows that I love in this. And of course, they're all the established, amazing professionals. And I'm doing my best to do a good job in the bedroom here. But the bottom line is that without a budget to market it, it's really hard to get people to discover anything and then to pay attention without various hooks. And I love my guests who I've had on, and I will have a lot more interesting ones coming up. I'm basically going to continue to I took a little hiatus with this because of the Chinese holidays and then the way my travel lined up to come back to the States about a week and a half ago. And what I decided to do is to continue to take a bit of a hiatus. I'm releasing this show. I'll release an update next week. I'll probably put something out every week briefly. And I'm not just talking to hear myself talk. So hopefully if you haven't tuned out yet, there will still be reason to tune in for the next one or two of these. But I have a lot of opportunities to record interviews coming up. So I'm going to take a hiatus from trying to scramble and publish interviews. I'm going to extend this hiatus that I'm in the middle of taking. I'm going to extend it indefinitely, but not too long, a few weeks, so that I can get through all these events I have and record a bunch of interviews. Because among other things, I'm going to end up in Los Angeles for a week for a whole bunch of movie business meetings. And while I'm there, I'm going to try to record like 4 or 5 interviews with people I've really been dying to sit down with in person. I don't want to drop any names here. Some of them are names that you would know if you're in film or TV. And we'll see. We'll see who's available. We'll see how we can line all this up. But that's been my goal. There are a lot of people who said they'd like to do the show or would love to do the show or be happy to do the show. And it's just a matter of syncing. So among others, I hope to have some TV writer, director, producers, a few film people, hopefully a few agents and manager types, a film or TV actor friend or two who's successful, and some entertainment business people. That is not going to be my exclusive focus, but that is what I'm working on for now. So what is my focus? Because sometimes it seems a little all over the map. Well, it's one part long-form interview show with entertainment adjacent people. The other aspect occasionally are these solo shows where I kind of share updates and sort of maybe occasionally get into some philosophical thing that's on my mind. And then there are updates where I just want to give you some information or maybe recommend something else. If there's another show or an event I'm involved in and I really want to make sure that you hear about it, I'll get on here and I'll do a shorty about that. So today is a little bit of numbers 2 and 3. I don't have a guest. I just have myself. But I want to talk about a few things, and I'm not going to take a long time to do this, but I do want to give you a little information, some backstory that I've hinted at before about a few things that have been sort of just affecting my world. First of all, here's the update on logistics. So in case I start to lose anybody, you've heard this piece. So Ying Li and I, my co-host on How China Works, we're both in the U.S. because we are speaking, or in my case, she's speaking on a panel and I'm moderating a panel at the Horasis China meeting in Las Vegas. I'll put a link in this episode so you can find out more about that. But Horasis is a leading global independent think tank. They are focused on helping find sustainable, ethical, and transparent solutions to the problems of development globally. So as developing countries attempt to become developed nations, and as the poor nations attempt to develop in the first place, there are all these pain points. And our friend, Dr. Frank Jürgen Richter, who is former director of Asia for the World Economic Forum at Davos, he founded Horasis 15 years ago to tackle these problems in a open and transparent and ethical way. Those are really his watchwords that I'm borrowing from his bio and the company bio and website. And so I have been honored to be asked to moderate a panel on the future of China's Belt and Road Initiative. So I've been doing a lot of homework on that. And the guests are this who's who of people who are very engaged in this, from being managers of big global venture capital funds to Chinese executives to European and American executives. The overall event has, I think, 4 or 5 U.S. governors are speaking and a lot of dignitaries from China. And it's going to be something pretty special for me to be inside of. I'm also working, I'll just announce this here, I'm working on a documentary film. I have kicked off a new project that I will be doing my first filming for at the event, well, ahead of the event. I am working on a documentary about Horasis, and this is independent. They're not funding it. It's my own point of view. So I can say what I want to say, but of course, I believe that what they're doing is really important. And so my point of view is that I want to encourage the work that they're doing while I also track over the next 2 or 3 years as I kind of follow Dr. Richter a bit. And, especially centered around these meetings, these four annual meetings that Horasis has that are more public. And then they also have some more private meetings. And then some interviews along the way. I want to follow him for 2 to 3 years. And, I'll be chatting as this unfolds, as various new challenges in the world come up, and as they work on possible solutions at Horasis meetings, and then as those get implemented or don't get implemented. I want to follow all this and basically see how effective a lot of this leadership is in action, this thought leadership as applied in reality. I'm very excited to see where this goes. I think it'll be a very interesting film, hopefully. My models for this are something along the lines of An Inconvenient Truth, and climate change is one part of what they look at, and climate effects of development, of course, are a big part of what they look at, but that's not the only focus. This is actually an even broader film than that. So I'm really excited to get into it. The next thing to mention is that Ying Li and I are also doing 3 How China Works live events while I am here on the West Coast and while she is as well. Her U.S. base has been San Francisco, and my filmmaking partner's base is Palo Alto, which is only half an hour away, depending on traffic. And so we have set up 3 events, and the dates are solid. The venues are solid, but I don't have all the information in front of me. I'm going to post that next week. I'll put all the details into a special episode that I title something along those lines, to recommend How China Works live. So if you're in San Francisco or the Bay Area, specifically Stanford or up in Berkeley at UC Berkeley, we have an event November 3rd at One Piece Work in San Francisco from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Then Ingy and I get in an Uber or on the train and we get ourselves to Stanford. We have an event at Stanford from 3 to 5 p.m. on November 3rd. And then time and location to be determined. On the evening, sometime of November 5th, we have an event at UC Berkeley. And I'll have all this, as I said, I'll put the complete itinerary in next week's version of this show. Oh, there's some birds. You hear that? That's why I wanted to record this way. The leaf blower stopped, and I thought I could finally do this. So after that event, here's what else is up with me. Those are kind of the big announcements. And, one last announcement is that I started a new monthly live comedy podcast with David Jacobs, who is the manager of Comedy Club China. Very funny guy, very smart guy. He's been wanting to get into podcasting for a long time. He's been on my old show, Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. I know him from me going up and embarrassing myself at open mic nights occasionally. And we just have gotten to know each other. And so I had an idea for a show. I knew he wanted to do something, so we combined our efforts. And we have something called the 3 C's Podcast, or the 3 C's Show. So it's a live show. We record it. I did some editing. And there was a bit of overly broy humor that popped up a little bit here and there, and a few audience things that sort of didn't pay off in terms of making sense if you weren't in the room. So I did some very specific editing. I didn't go too crazy. But David now has that posted. So I'll also put the link to the very first episode of the 3 C's Podcast. And we are not showing up in all the podcatchers yet. So the link I have is actually basically the back end server link that's posted in public, so you can listen to it from sort of a special little place. So I hope you'll check that out. We're going to do it basically once every month. It may be more like 6 or 7 weeks, depending on, availability of people. We're looking to do one end of November, right after Thanksgiving. Now I'm waiting actually on David. As I record this, I'm waiting on David to confirm his availability and find availability of our venue of choice. And let me move on now. So after I finish these How China Works live events with Ying Lee, I'm on a plane to see my mama for a week and a half. I'm going to Birmingham, Alabama to see my mom, Ellen, and her husband, Ray. Very excited about that. And I'm going to spend some time writing. And I'm also going to spend some time, of course, doing other work. And there's some noise out there. Guess we have some people dropping off some people at the house across the street. And I also, this is the thing I've been sort of dreading getting into, and I don't know that the world's clamoring to hear me go on about this, so I'll keep it pretty brief. But I guess I want to talk about this for the record a little bit, because I mentioned in passing and something else that put me off schedule a little bit. I don't want to say this for sympathy or anything, because I kind of soldiered on. It affected me less than I expected it would, in a way, which is going to seems strange when I tell you what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is my dad dying June 3rd, and William Clyde Davis, may he rest in peace. And of course, you don't want to speak ill of the dead. And what I've said in private to people who I know well enough to wanted to really hear really how I was doing or how I felt about it, and who knew something of our backstory, was that the reality is he died with a lot of great friends. He had a lot of people who loved him, who knew him from kind of later middle age onward. And what I have said to really close friends, and I'm saying it now, publicly, is that the thing that's hard to reconcile, and I know a lot of people can relate to this. I assume a lot of people can relate to this, depending on who's listening. But maybe you had somebody in your life who you, for better or worse, were, stuck with each other because of a family relationship or something. And it could be a coworker, but I guess a family member is where this is the most meaningful. And the person who the world knew and the person who you knew, there was a cognitive dissonance. There was a big lack of sync between those things. And that was the case with me and my dad. And so my mom divorced him before I turned 7, and I'm 51 right now. It's been a long time. But without getting into her business, I would say that I know that at least up until relatively recently, she would still occasionally have nightmares about the man. And I have long since, fortunately, dealt with my own issues in that area. But the tricky part of things, I started saying this a moment ago, and I want to give a little more context, and now I'll just say it. I feel like he spent he died 4 days short of his 80th birthday. And I truly feel that he spent the last 20 years trying to make up for the first 60. And I don't say that lightly. I won't attempt to do a big eulogy here, and I'm also not going to do a character assassination. Neither one of those things is why I want to talk about this. But what's been on my mind has been, how do you deal with this? Because, I visited him when I was in the States. My last trip earlier this year, I was actually out of China for over the first quarter of the year, between the U.S. and then Paris, for scouting for this film and whatnot. So while I was in the U.S. previously this year, back in the spring, I visited him I was able to get over for a day and a night, and left the next day in Aiken, South Carolina, where he lived in a independent living facility. So not even assisted living, but a place where they leave you, to your own devices, essentially. So they have some kind of a small medical clinic there, but it's not for people who need constant care. And he had his issues, but his day-to-day functioning, he was all on his own and puttered around with walker if needed, or a cane, or he had like a little electric scooter if he needed to get around some. And Aiken's a small town. It's a very lovely small town, but he was close to shopping and the handful of restaurants that he liked to go to. And he could get around with his little, like Rascal scooter. I don't know what the brand is, but that's the kind of thing it is. So, people who knew him tended to love him. He was really funny, really smart. Back in the day, you would have called him, I've been told by many, many women that they found him to be very handsome back in the day. And, always very clever. He was a performer. I'm certain I got some of my performing and performative aspects of my personality from him, as well as a bit from my mom, but probably more from him. He was very involved in community theater. He did radio, both professionally and as an amateur. He did TV at the local to the regional level. And he was, he wrote and directed his own commercials when he was like selling commercial real estate. So he's always, he always had his hand in the production of things and not just, showing up and wondering how things worked. Part of what I would say that I admired about him and that I got as a part of a legacy, in addition to things that that I'll get to in a second. Some of the things that I'm very happy for him, or at least could be proud of that he accomplished, were that despite his numerous failures as a man or as a businessman, he kept on going. He picked himself up and he kept moving ahead to the best of his ability. And I don't want to, again, get into a chapter and verse summary of the man's life, but how to talk about this is what's really on my mind, because the man who had all these friends who remembered him from 15, 20 years ago, from before he moved back to one of his hometowns of Aiken, South Carolina, and he had lived down in South Georgia and Albany, Georgia, where I lived for a few, somewhat okay and somewhat godforsaken years, 2 years of high school and then 1 year community college, and have a few good friends from there, and definitely have some good memories, but I also have a lot of, experiences that are just better left to the ash heap of history. But he was sort of like one of the unofficial mayors of the town in a way. He was one of those guys who, hail fellow, well met, and, big drinker, big partier, boisterous, super loud, super extroverted, all these things that I'm not. I can be loud and I can play an extrovert, but I'm actually very introverted and tend toward quiet when I'm not doing a public event where I need to grab a mic and speak and be confident. I talk very little, if you know me, in my private life now. I used to talk people's ears off, and now I only talk long form when there's a mic involved. So that's kind of funny. But back to my dad, he was such a study in contrast, because for all of his, frankly, pretenses at education and erudition of different kinds, and he had made and lost a lot of money, but if he made $1, he would leverage it into 3 and then take those 3 and gamble 5 and then come up owing 2, right? So that was really kind of the story of his life, and people who didn't know the inner workings would see fun things. They would see, oh, that's a fun house, or that's a fun vacation you took, or that's a sweet vacation home, or that's, fill in the blank of something that seems shiny and impressive to people who don't know the story behind it. And so we had a lot of those things at different times. And there are things I'm saving for an actual book, I guess, where I will talk about some of the crazier aspects of living with him, including having the DEA coming to arrest him in investigation with something from a business partner's dealings that he ultimately managed to escape, because he was not implicated, but there was a massive investigation underway, and it was very tricky, and going bankrupt so many times and having bills in my name. My credit was ruined. I got all this credit when I was 18, and he used it because he didn't have credit to sign a lease on an apartment after he lost the house. And, to establish utilities, it all went in my name, and then he defaulted on all of it, and I was 18 years old. So I've done a pretty great job of ruining my own credit more than once, but I had a lot of help getting started. And I don't mention all this to air dirty laundry. This is actually the tip of an iceberg that I'm not going to get into right now. But there was so much reprehensible behavior that all the positives of the people who knew him as funny or smart or cute, all those people's memories are legit for them. And I saw that. But I also saw the very two-faced nature behind the scenes. Somebody who he would think was acting as if he was their best friend. They would leave, and he would say things like, "God, I can't stand that cocksucker." So pardon my language. But, he would turn on a dime. I mean, you would see like the smile fall from his face as he shut the door on somebody and just go, "God, I hope they fucking just don't come back." More times than I could count. And so it makes me wonder how real, of course, any of those friendships were, or even positives in our relationship. But this gets back to the central point. He died June 3rd. I'm recording right now. It's October 25th. And it affected me, but it's hard to know how to talk about it publicly because I do want to respect, again, he spent the last 20 years making up for the first 60. And he really put his money where his mouth is in terms of charitable works with his churches that he belonged to, from Seattle and then to Aiken. He was in the Episcopal Church and was like a layperson. He was very involved in doing readings and this and that. And as long as he physically could, he would help with various events and community events and things. And he had a lot of people who loved him, who knew him only in the most recent periods of time, or who knew him very casually 20 years prior to that. So those people's memories are valid, but, my memories of things, him nearly killing my mother a few times and putting me in the hospital, a couple of times from physical violence, driven by alcohol and his own demons. These are all things, I've dealt with it. That's how I can talk about it very dispassionately. If I sound too cold, sorry, but I've had a long time to deal with figuring this out. But how do you reconcile this? How do you talk about this stuff honestly when there are all these different facets to people and they're not all pretty? They're not all perfect. They're not all really for public consumption. So again, I'm actually holding back. I dropped a couple of hints of some major things, but who knows? Maybe in 5 years I'll have a book out and talk about this. But that's really what I want to talk about. And I've been thinking about it in juxtaposition to the story. I think of all the people I've known. I'm at the age where a lot of people I know were, of course you have people who die from tragedies, and that's happened on and off throughout my life, like anybody who's traveled and had a life. But I also have people who are starting to die of not old age in the terms of my contemporaries, but I've had a lot of people who are dying from life. I've known quite a few people who've committed suicide, and so I won't get too much into this. I've been fortunate that although I can understand those thoughts. It's not something that I've ever gotten super close to, but I've definitely gotten to where I understood it emotionally. But is related, I mentioned this to say that, my dad dying, as major as it is / should be to most people, I was much more affected, and I remain much more affected right now, thinking about the death of a few different friends of mine who took their own life. My friend Jason, specifically, one of my closest friends, brilliant guy, brilliant writer and thinker and computer programmer, brilliant guy, lover of cigars, Scotch whiskey, and complicated women. And just one of the people who meant the most to me, like a real brother that real brother from another mother, and someone who, and this has been a couple of years now. I did a whole eulogy episode of Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom about him about a year or so ago, back July a year ago. And it's strange because actually Jason had been a big power lifter, and he also was tall and big and muscular dude anyway, bigger than me. And he lost a ton of weight, and he had a bunch of great clothes that wouldn't fit, including some like sweaters and sweater jackets and some dress shirts that had barely been worn because he got a bunch of stuff before he quit his old job where he wore nice dress shirts. So I inherited a bunch of stuff from him. And over the years, it's all gone except for this one blue and white sort of sweater jacket that I wear. I've got it here. I'm not wearing it now because it's hot. I'm in a t-shirt, but I'm in a t-shirt and shorts. It's very hot. But, I have this one item that is still great. I love it, but I remember I don't wear it as an homage to him, but I can't help but think of my friend when I see it or when I wear it. And there's some things at my mom's, getting back to the plot of this, there's some things that a family friend, a friend of my dad's, his friend Gene, and then his other friend Carol, who's a friend from high school, who had reconnected with him and was very kind to him in his last couple of years living back in Aiken, South Carolina. His friend Gene's from Atlanta and South Georgia as well. He knows her from there. They were amazing because I was back in China when he died, and it was all very sudden. I talked about this on a previous episode in terms of just the logistics of this. But there was no way I could get back. There was nothing I could do. By the time he had fallen and gotten, he had fallen and was unnoticed for 4 days because of a holiday and no staff who happened to do checks on him. And by the time his friend Ed tracked me down, and by the time I was able to get through to anybody, he was in the hospital, and then he was dead within a few hours. So by the time that anybody got information to me, it was basically all over. I'm so grateful to Gene and Carol for helping to settle the affairs of his estate, and I did some powers of attorney with them to let them handle some things. And Gene met my mom and Ray to give them some stuff of his. I gave away most of the things that he had to his friends to have Gene and Carol give to friends. But there are a handful of things I've got, including this ring that he had. It's probably it's a piece of jewelry I would never buy for myself. It's not my taste, but I'm going to get it and I'll probably wear it. It's a gold ring with a fancy antique gold coin from Britain and as the center of it, and it's ringed with diamonds, and it's pretty nice. It's a pretty nice ring, and he got it during a period of his life where he was very flush. His jeweler friend Mike made it for him, and it's valuable, relatively speaking. And the only thing of value really that he passed away owning. And that in his class ring, which I'll keep it in a safe back here in the States. And so when I see my mom, part of it is, of course, we're going to deal with our own stuff, and that's between us. Related to all of this, we've had some great conversations on the phone about what all this means to finally, he's passed, and he lived the last 20 years of his life as a good man. And the 10 years before that, he was trying to be a good man, and I give him credit for all these things. And so that is where I'll leave it when I shut up here in a few minutes about it. But been thinking about what all this means, and what's the sum of a life. He left no he left no burial plot for himself. He had, he had an insurance policy that would have apparently There was a deed, there was some land he kept for a long time that was apparently going to come to me. I never expected it. There was a insurance policy that would have paid out a bit of a death benefit. All these things were invalidated. All these things failed because at one point or another, he lost the ability to make the payments. So the land that he kept for 25 years, that was his one last investment. And I don't know if it's swampland or farmland or in the middle of a suburb of $20 million homes. I doubt the latter. But nonetheless, no land, this isn't about me getting cash and prizes. I never expected anything. But it's really a stark, humbling realization to me that when we settled all of his affairs, then there was the cost of cremation. By the time we settled all of his affairs, between getting a deposit back from where he lived and the little bit of cash on hand that he had from a Social Security check after his rent had been paid, there was $20 left over. He died with a net worth of $20. And I let one of the ladies keep that towards her gas money. I'm sure she spent $200 on gas, and they would not hear of letting me try to pay anything on top of that. But I don't mean to focus on the money to be crass. I'm focusing on this to talk about the bigger point, which is, this is where I come from. And a lot of other places, he's but one influence on my life. And I acknowledge the positives. I acknowledge the good. I'm really appreciative that of his better qualities, I seem to have gotten, a piece of some of those. And that of his more negative qualities that I don't have as much, or I don't have any of that. I'm very happy that I don't have any addiction dispositions. I've tried basically everything, frankly, under the sun that's interested me. And I could take or leave everything, and in terms of alcohol or any other substances. And so very fortunate that I don't have any issues like that. I don't have any violence issues. I actually went the other way and developed a bit of a white knight complex for many years related to women. And so trying to moderate my own approach to the world was a big part of my growth process, frankly. So today's show really is if you knew me better. So I'm going to go to Alabama, talk to my mom, and, we'll talk about other stuff too. And I'll work on writing my TV pilot that I'm very excited about, that I'm in the final stages of these massive revisions for this TV show that I would mean more to me than almost anything to get this show made, which I hope to do after this movie project with Larry and my documentary project that I'm developing for a few years. I would also like to do this TV show if I'm so fortunate. And, after I see my mom and her husband, Ray, and totally blow my keto diet, because I've been on that here since I've been in California, come back to California. And then Larry and I go to LA for a week of business meetings. And then I'm back to Beijing. And so I'll be back to Beijing, looks like the week of Thanksgiving. I'll be back in time to have Thanksgiving at Kevin Geiger's house with him and his family and some friends. David Jacobs and I are going to get another 3Cs podcast show put up on its feet, hopefully late November or else early December. I have a bunch of How China Works Live events and things planned with Ying Li for China once we're back, so that's a whole other story. And I have a lot of these If I Knew You Better interviews that I'm going to do. Plus, I'll be teaching a 2-day producing course. I'll be possibly traveling around and doing some of that. And then hopefully, again, I'll be doing all this while I juggle, going off to make a movie and doing some things remotely. So a little bit of an overshare for me here. But I say this to illustrate that this is the only way I know how to live. It's the only options that I feel comfortable with. There are other things I could do. I've had a job before where I show up and I do the prescribed things, and I collect a check on the weekly or the biweekly. And there's a lot of value in having some stability and security and comfort in your life. And there's certainly days and ways in which I had a lot more. But the only way for me is to pursue all of these things that I care about in their own time, but relatively simultaneously or synchronistically as I can. So thanks for bearing with me and my kind of freeform musings on this, but I thought it would be good to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. And, as I do these interviews with people, some of the comments, when people like it, I get nice comments that are essentially about how did you get people to open up. It's very much people reveal things in these conversations. And, we often will talk sort of more like this before we record, or else it's somebody I have known previously. Or sometimes we do it on the mic, but I want to talk about things that matter. God knows there are enough podcasts out there talking about, all kinds of things, marketing content, recycling, talking points of PR for, if it's somebody doing something public facing, and lots of meandering stuff. And as meandering as this one might have been today, I want the podcast itself with interviews. I want the shows that have guests to really enlighten you about people's lives. And I hope to, get to continue to talk with people who shed light on all this for me, because I'm trying to figure out myself as we go along here. And I appreciate you listening. Please don't forget to share, rate, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, whatever that may be. Let me know if you have any thoughts, feedback, comments, criticisms as well. Be nice, but be real as you like. You can check out crazyinagoodway.com to find, among other things, a contact link for me. I'm also pretty searchable on all the socials. All that stuff is listed online. All my podcasts are online via that Crazy in a Good Way link as well. Thank you again for listening. I'll be back next week with the announcements about How China Works Live, the specifics of those events, and I'll have a little recap of how the Ross's China meeting went. But until then, thanks again for listening. I'm Brendan Davis, and I'll see you next week on If I Knew You Better.